Hey, I hope you've been doing well, random stranger. We have reached the second last episode of Haibane Renmei, and we'll just be watching episode 12 today because I do want to leave some time at the end of the next and last episode to just go back and review the show as a whole. Feeling so far about the show, I do feel in my bones that Rakka is almost ready to spread her wings and leave Glee behind. I am still very much on the fence about Reki because she just is really struggling to confront her past traumas and all of that self-doubt that's inside her, and seems to be a lot more comfortable clinging to her life in Glee, which is totally understandable. Like, I totally get that. One of the biggest struggles in life is moving on in order to find your true purpose. You know, it always comes with a level of risk. I love the comment that TF Shaman left mentioning the very relevant concept of ikigai, which is a concept that refers to something that gives a person a sense of purpose, a reason to live, something that makes life being worth living for them. It's also a feeling that your life has meaning and the fulfillment that comes from pursuing your passions. One of the things that Haibane seems to need is to find their purpose. Ikigai isn't something you're born with or something someone can teach you. It's something you have to discover for yourself. And just latching onto that last part, I do totally agree that a clear lesson in Haibane and in life really is that our struggles are never simply just solved for us. We have to do the hard work of self-reflection and then going through that process of slowly, sometimes painfully, becoming the person that we're meant to be. I know that I have been learning that lesson quite a bit just in these past few weeks, just coming up against these really hard things that require me to really consciously pick myself up and focus on what are the things that I can actually change and improve on, and then what are the things that I can't. Likewise, for the Haibane, someone like the communicator can guide them, but ultimately they have to take responsibility for themselves and for their own healing. Episode 10 started with these flashbacks to the birth of Reki into Glee. She was born during winter and you could see that her cocoon was all frozen over. Winter is often associated with things like death and darkness and just a dormant, stagnant sort of state. And that frozen cocoon definitely gave off a sense of being trapped or like cut off from the warmth and the renewal of life, or with spring. I felt really mirrored Reki's own stunted emotional and psychological state. Unfortunately for Reki, she'd also been born into a room that had been completely boarded up. And Ron Sturt Evans brought up something that didn't actually hit me until I read that comment and I watched it again. They wrote, Reki must have screamed in pain as Rakka did when her wings emerged and attracted Nemu's attention. It forces a comparison of the differences between the two's birth events. Rakka had the support of all the Haibane, but Reki went through all of that trauma alone, with no guidance as to what was happening. Where am I? Who am I? Why is this happening to me? All of Rakka's questions with no one to answer. It is horrifying to imagine. You're totally right. You know, by the time Nemu and Kuramori found her, Reki had to go through all of that pain on her own. And I still remember how horrified I was when we watched Rakka go through that. Except for Reki, it was infinitely worse because, as that comment said, you know, no one was there to comfort her or to help clean off her wings or to explain things, which goes some way to explaining why Reki tries so hard to take care of the other Haibane and Rakka. It's probably because she doesn't want anyone else to go through that horrible experience of being scared and alone like she had to. I also wonder if that horrible start to her life in Glee contributed to Reki growing black wings. She was alone in her dream, i.e. like her past life, and she was also alone in her first few vulnerable moments in Glee, which only would have worsened her feelings of abandonment. So it was no wonder that she really latched onto Kuramori, you know, the first kind face that she saw when she came to. Reki's first few months as a Haibane seemed to also reinforce a sense of being a burden to others. Like at first, even Nemu refused to look at her, and she was isolated from the other Haibane. The townspeople kind of looked at her weird because the splotches or the color of her wings. And in fact, the only other positive interaction that we saw young Reki have was with the communicator, who kind of gave her this friendly head pat. Again, cementing the case for him being a total sweetheart and just totally destroying all of the conspiracy theories that I once had. Given the profound rejection that Reki had to go through, and importantly, it wasn't just in her head, it was actually happening. It's no wonder that she treasured Kuramori all the more. Kuramori cared enough that in the communicator's presence, she kind of just forgot herself. She forgot that strict protocol around communicating and sort of even risked her own safety to get medicine for Reki. Another sign of the depth of Kuramori's care for Reki was just how mad she got at her for mutilating her own wings. Although I do have to say that slapping is never a good way to express concern. And I am glad that Reki learned from that. So when it was Rakka's turn to sort of go through that deep depressive dip, she emulated Kuramori's approach when supporting Rakka through her depression by reassuring Rakka that she'd always be by her side. What Kuramori had done for her, just without the slapping. Overall, the flashbacks confirmed Kuramori's huge influence on Reki when she was still a troubled baby of the Haibane. We also saw the seeds of Reki's tendency to internalize blame, like when a young Nemu, which is typical of an insensitive kid who says stupid things, right? Attributed the possibility of Kuramori dying to Reki's actions. Fortunately, Nemu and Reki kind of made up later and developed like this really solid friendship. But again, you could just see how those words could have had a lasting impression on Reki and reinforced her instinct to take responsibility for everything that goes wrong, even when it's not her fault. When hurtful things are said to us while we're still very young, they can haunt us for the rest of our adult lives, even though we mature and we come to know that those things aren't true on an intellectual level. But sometimes it's still like this emotional hangover that's buried deep in your psyche that's just really hard to recover from without some serious therapy. So I really, really felt for Reki. I wonder if Kuramori's day of flight came partly because she was able to let go of her concern and her sense of responsibility for Reki. Like by the time Kuramori reached her own moment of transcendence, Reki had made friends, she'd settled into her new room, and she'd found purpose caring for the new Haibane. Maybe Kuramori was able to move forward because she saw, or she thought she saw, that Reki was well on her way to being a well-adjusted Haibane. It's interesting to compare that to Reki's situation. So while Kuramori was able to embrace her day of flight after Reki had found her own place in the Haibane community, Reki appears stubbornly unable to make similar progress, even though her mentee, Rakka, has begun to discover her purpose and is clearly much more well-adjusted and mentally well. I think the difference comes down to Reki's unwillingness to go through that painful process of self-reflection. She envies and ultimately can't celebrate Rakka's progress because it highlights her own refusal to go down that same path of transformation. Again, I think it's just eminently understandable why the prospect of leaving Glee is so scary for Reki. Finding her place in Glee had been an uphill battle, and now that she's finally carved this space or this sense of belonging there, the idea of then just abandoning it all is terrifying, to the point where I could totally see why she'd rather just cling to this life and forego her day of flight. However, there's this profound irony in that by refusing to move on, Reki is actually jeopardizing the very existence that she's trying to hold onto. Because if we think about it, Glee has only felt like a home to Reki because of all the meaningful relationships that she's formed there with Kuramori, with Nemu, Rakka, and all the other Haibane. It's those bonds and the sense of purpose that they represent that give Reki a sense of belonging that she didn't have in her previous life. But the nature of the system in Glee is that no Haibane can remain there forever. One by one, the other Haibane will eventually leave this world behind. And the shocker that was revealed to us last time was that any Haibane who miss their day of flight or take too long are condemned to live out their final days in solitude. That is, assumingly, away from other Haibane. So what does that actually mean practically? And I think Iseno Alpha had a pretty good theory that the Haibane may actually go on to become part of the Haibane Renmei. So they stay in Glee, but they do remain separate from the Haibane and can't speak directly to them, which is actually a plausible theory. I think either way, the important point is that the life and the relationships that made Glee a true home for Reki will cease to exist if she misses her day of flight and she has to go into that sort of solitary life. The only difference is whether she seizes the opportunity to break free from her self-defeating cycle or whether she condemns herself to a cold, lonely existence, bereft of all of the very connections that she wants to keep. Imagine having to live alone with only the memories of all of your friends who have moved on to a better life. Or worse, who might still live in an old home, but who are no longer accessible to you. So Rakka's fever started breaking out and Reki just road rage all the way up to the communicator's headquarters, and she stormed in there like she owned the place. But the communicator was just chill as always, and it was actually really comforting to see that he can be flexible with the rules if he sees a need for it, or if he knows that the Haibane need to express their emotions fully. His answer to why he left Rakka to be found was that he knew that Reki would take care of her, just like she had taken care of Hyoko, which I guess so, like fair enough. It does make me think that Hyoko might have actually accompanied Reki to the wall during her rebellious stage and maybe even touched it with her. And that's the incident that Midori was referring to when she said that he'd almost died. That also might be another thing that Reki must still feel incredibly guilty for, although she certainly does not show it in her interactions with him. I thought that this was a fair question, the question of why must a Haibane be punished if they touch the wall? Considering what Rakka's punishment turned out to be, I think the term punishment isn't entirely accurate. It would be maybe more precise to speak of the consequences of touching the wall. Like if you touch the wall before you're ready, the fever just seems to be like a natural outcome. So it's not so much a punishment, but a consequence of the mind encountering some knowledge or some power that it's not yet prepared to handle. It was still odd though that the Haibane Renmei framed like touching the wall as a crime for which one has to be punished. To me, it didn't feel like a crime in the conventional understanding of the term. Like there was no malicious intent or wrongdoing involved. So while Reki was raging at this and was ready to take up arms in Rakka's defense, Rakka herself was surprisingly at ease, almost as if she intuitively understood that these rules were in place for her own good, something that we have ourselves been learning as the show progresses, that even if there was punishment, that she'd be able to face it. I assume that she saw the bulletin board just like everyone else with the notice of her punishment, and yet she still happily trundled off to meet the communicator. Sure, she still has a few things to figure out, like she still thinks it was the medicine that cured her wings, but she is well on her way to leaving Glee, having found a way out of that circle of sin. What was interesting as Reki had this chat with the communicator didn't seem to know whether Rakka had truly solved the circle of sin problem. You'd think that no longer being sin-bound and solving the circle of sin riddle would kind of be the same thing, but perhaps there is a more nuanced understanding of the process. So what the communicator did know was that Rakka had found her peace by accepting her past and dealing with her guilt over the bird who had loved her. And the fact that he couldn't give a definitive answer as to whether she'd ultimately solved the riddle, I think shows that he recognizes that solving the circle of sin isn't a single, clearly defined, discrete moment, but like a lifelong, ongoing process of growth and transformation. So he can discern the progress that a Haibane has made and even hear their deepest thoughts, but the final resolution of the circle of sin requires each Haibane to forge their own path, and even the communicator doesn't know if they will actually keep doing that and persisting with that direction. It kind of goes back to the concept of ikigai and that being something that you have to discover for yourself and to continue discovering for yourself. I liked that the communicator played a little Uno reverse card and just turned the conversation on to Reki and reminded her that she's got her own issues to deal with. For the first time, we learned that one does not stay a Haibane forever. There is a limit to how much time they have to work through their personal demons. They either move on with their day of flight or something else happens. We don't really know for sure. But whatever it is, Reki can't continue on with the current status quo. Even her halo is starting to fade. Reki has been avoiding her abandonment and self-esteem issues for way too long, and I think we're about to see what the consequences of that are, unless, of course, she's able to turn herself around. On the surface, Reki has some compelling reasons to accept her day of flight, other than the obvious reason that it would be healthy for her to finally confront all of her deep-seated insecurities that have really held her back. She also has the example set by Ku, who, despite being the youngest, was determined to be this trailblazer and take flight first. And she kept trying to discover her purpose, even though she failed a few times. But eventually she found it by realizing that she doesn't have to be anyone but herself. Reki also has this opportunity to be an example to Nemu, who is actually really worried about her. But instead of being galvanized to find a way out of her own darkness, to help put Nemu at ease, Reki immediately kind of just closed off the possibility that she was ever going to have a day of flight and thought it would just solve things if she point blank told Nemu to just not worry about her. So at every turn, Reki dismisses the idea that she could get better or that she's worth it, and that itself is the problem. It's interesting to consider things from Nemu's perspective. Maybe she's taken on a similar sense of responsibility for Reki's well-being that Kuramori once had, and maybe she sees it as her duty to ensure that Reki, like all the other Haibane, can find her way out of Glee. And that itself has become a roadblock to her own journey. Preoccupied as she is with Reki's struggles, Nemu might have been unable to fully focus on her own growth this whole time. If we sort of fast forward and forecast what might happen, if Reki continues to be stubborn and refuses to even try to accept her day of flight, Nemu herself may be forced to accept that despite her best efforts, she can't compel Reki to change either. Her redemption and liberation can only really come from within. And isn't that just the most relatable problem to have? Sometimes we see other people struggle, people that we really care about, and we want to help them and we try and do things for them and talk to them. But also often we have to learn to accept that at the end of the day, only they can help themselves. So the communicator just spitting out truths left, right, and center. And he also called out Reki's envy of Rakka's progress. And she did not respond in a great way, likely because she knows it's kind of true. Because the ugly truth of it is, Rakka does harbor maybe a tinge of resentment that Rakka has found a way to break free from the burden of being sin-bound when she herself is still stuck in that cycle. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure some of us have been in situations where we've wanted to be genuinely happy for a friend only to find ourselves wrestling with a twinge of jealousy where underneath we're just irrationally wishing that they had remained trapped in their difficulties too. It's kind of like, I wish I had a buddy with me who's also going through the same thing, and we can just kind of muddle through it together. It's kind of this uncomfortable and shameful feeling too, because it exposes like a much less flattering side of ourselves, like that selfish part of ourselves that doesn't want to be alone in our struggles. So this envy of Reki's is relatable. Like, it doesn't make me think that she's a terrible person or anything. It humanizes her, and it reminds us that even the most empathetic and supportive individuals, which Reki has become, can harbor these dark undercurrents of envy and of self-loathing. We found out what punishment Rakka was given for touching the walls, and it turned out to be this new cleaning job that seems to have given her a new sense of purpose. Not only is she allowed to freely use her voice, but it is a job that involves working inside the walls and getting up close and personal to its power. So I think this was just another confirmation that what was called a punishment is in fact a necessary part of a Haibane's spiritual and psychological growth. You know, it's a trial to be faced, not really a sentence to be endured because of something wrong that you did. I love that Rakka just casually asked if she was going to be imprisoned, and yet she went to see the communicator anyway, knowing that that was a possibility. She really trusts him. And what made that interaction even better was that the communicator just kind of chuckled in response. Specifically, Rakka's job is to go around like cleaning the tags and collecting these things called light leaves. And it's this slow kind of mindless activity that I think is actually designed to be that way in order to allow the Haibane to think about the direction of her own life in Glee. Like, sometimes when I need to think about something deeply, I will just clean. That canal and the little round tub or boat thing kind of reminded me of Acheron, like the river in Greek mythology that the dead have to cross to get to the afterlife. And it's like Rakka's just on the edge of moving on, kind of getting a feel for the life beyond, just getting up close to it, getting comfortable with it. And again, I just feel like the communicator's setting her up for when she eventually does leave Glee. The light leaves are pretty cool. Like, they're infused with some kind of light that's used to make their halos. So by collecting these light infused leaves, Rakka is quite literally tending to the physical manifestation of the divine spark that dwells within each Haibane, preparing herself and every other Haibane for the eventual shedding of their physical forms in Glee. So this role, it represents a huge step forward for Rakka as she moves from the periphery of Glee's mysteries and not really knowing much about the town to now a position of much greater responsibility and intimacy with the mysteries of Glee. It's interesting to compare Rakka's new job to the one that Reki was given by Kuramori. Rakka's job seems to be, as I said, just preparing her to become more comfortable with the mystic forces that permeate this world. By contrast, Reki's job of caring for new Haibane and really taking on like a caretaker role at Old Home had the effect of cementing her place within the confines of Glee. So even though it was a meaningful role, it fundamentally helped Reki find belonging in a place that was never really meant to be a permanent home. In sum, Rakka's new job, it allows her to get more comfortable with the edges of Glee and with the idea of maybe even leaving Glee one day, while Reki's job put her right at the center of the Haibane hub and kind of locked her into a feeling of never wanting to leave Glee. I feel like that perfectly reflects the double-edged nature of the roles and the responsibilities that we get comfortable with. They can either serve as stepping stones towards boosting our confidence and like preparing us for the next step forward, or they can become shackles that hold us back and cause us to cling ever more tightly to the familiar. What makes the difference, I guess, is our state of mind. If we're constantly looking for or assuming the worst in things, like Reki, I mean, of course you'd cling to the stability of what is familiar to you. Whereas Rakka's openness to self-discovery and change really allowed her to progress. So maybe it's not really the jobs themselves, but the mindset that we have when doing those jobs. And then that's just basically true of life in general. Like the challenges we face aren't inherently limiting or liberating, like rather it's our willingness to confront them or to envision new possibilities that then determine whether they empower or trip us up. Let's talk about the abandoned factory kids who we saw a lot more of in these 2 episodes. We know that they're like a bit rough around the edges and fancy themselves to be badasses, but at heart, they're actually really good kids. And it's fun seeing Reki's love-hate relationship with them, particularly with Hyoko, who continues to troll her even as he clearly still cares very much about her. We also found out that some of the younger abandoned factory kids are fostered out to old home, although they do get to go back and visit a couple times every year, which is an interesting arrangement. It's not a far stretch to assume that old home is the much better environment for younger kids because they do have a house mother and they have a set schedule and discipline and regular food and stuff like that. We also saw that the abandoned factory is, ultimately it's an inherently unsafe physical space. The older kids do their best, but they're still adolescents themselves who need direction and care. It's probably also why Reki was banned from crossing over to the abandoned factory. It's just a much more precarious, freewheeling, less structured sort of place. One where I think she would have had less of a chance to self-reflect and try and pull herself together compared to a place like Old Home. Haibane episode 12 is a go. If you guys are ready, let's do it in 3, 2, 1, play. And we're so close now. I don't know. I really don't know if Reki is going to at least take one step towards finding her way out of Glee, or whether she's just gone way past the point where she even wants to anymore, or has just given up on it entirely. I can't tell if we're going to get a quote unquote happy ending. And I guess with this kind of show, that's not really the point, right? It's more about showing the diversity in human lives and all the different outcomes and all the different feelings, the ways that people respond differently to situations and just to life. I do like that OP ends in kind of a major sounding chords. So maybe there is hope yet. No. She's given up. She's definitely given up. She's not even taking the lighter. It's so interesting though that they're not showing Reki being just a depressed slump. She's just going about everyday life as if it's normal, but on the inside, she's kind of already shut down. And sometimes that's what people who are depressed or who feel stuck can present as. Like outwardly, they're fine, but inwardly, they're just falling apart. This is quite festive. It's good shells and bad shells. Don't know if that's metaphorical for like Haibane. Oh, it's like the sounds that she heard from within the walls. She's gonna go buy a nut for a Reki. Just say what you feel, Hyoko. She's very protective of Hyoko. They get the apology nut. It's so ironic because she doesn't see that how she is now is also impacting the people around her who care for her. Hyoko. Oh, oh, wait, that seems like an insane amount of blood loss. Like literal rivers of blood. What was he gonna do? Like just take a hammer to the walls? Damn. Okay. It makes sense, but she didn't stop him. Yeah. I mean, I wish every success for them. There is a limit to how much you can help someone or you can get them to ask for help in the first place. But we'll see. Yeah, I feel like Nemu's got the got the right idea. The silence. was deafening. Okay, maybe she does really just need someone like Rakka to snap her out of it. Tell her straight, you know, that she's not only hurting herself, but also hurting the others around her who want to help her or who want to see her happy. What was that? 4-3-4-3? I don't know. Oh. Oh. So we're going back to the significance of names now and how it determines the trajectory of your life, or reflects it, rather. Involved? Nut? Where? As in, she'll be involved in someone like Reki's life? Okay, I see. Formed relationships. Involved nut. That's so cute. Alright, so it's like the guilt that is like the iron claps on her, and only she has the keys to it. Oh. Oh, okay. That's I'm actually surprised by that thing about how you can't forgive yourself, because I thought that was part of the process of forgiveness. In addition to knowing that others also care about you, but I guess they're really putting the emphasis on the importance of connections with others. Hmm, interesting. That is one angry looking snowman. It's meant to be Reki. Oh man, she's already preparing herself. It's kind of like self-defense mechanism. She's preparing for the worst. I don't know. I don't know what would break through that really thick layer of guilt and self-doubt. And thinking that the others care, but not quite enough to be able to remember you when you're gone. You know what's also so weird? Like, it's like none of them are really talking straight to Reki. Not that I blame them, because it's like, how do you speak to someone who is in such a state? I don't know. Rakka's working her way towards, laying on Reki some truths. But cute. All the people we've met. Mm. So all of these scenes are showing us that it's the relationships between all these people that really mattered and have impacted who they are as people and the choices that they make, and have really taken them through life, I guess. Even the grumpy old clockworker. And Reki's just alone at old home. So that's why she didn't want to go out. It's because she doesn't really feel the warmth of all those connections and relationships deep down, because her guilt won't let her. Mm. Mm. Street style. Oh no, is tonight the night that she has to go into solitude? Wait, Midori seems to know something. No, no rest. I do not like the sound of this ringing bell. I thought she was going to throw it through the window. What, like riding? Skywriting? uh, Illegal fireworks. That'll do the trick. Wait, I as in Hyoko has been stupid or Reki has been stupid? Well, I mean, it's kind of both, so. uh, Rakka just walked away. Okay, that's good. That's a good sign. That's the beginnings of repairing these broken relationships and hopefully towards getting rid of that guilt that Reki refuses to let go of. Just give them time. Indeed, good question for the whole series. Hey, it was back to the beginning. But with nice ethereal music now. It's that choir with kids. Probably all the Haibane who've left. Moved on to better lives. That's the walls lighting up. That was an oddly comforting ending. Okay, just focus on those last couple of shots, right? There was the choir of kids singing, obviously evoking all of the voices that Rakka has been hearing from within the walls, or at least Ku's voice, but I'm assuming it represents all of the previous Haibane who used to be in Glee but then found their way and left it. So the walls lit up because of the thoughts of everyone thinking about the people that they care about. And then you swung up to the night sky where you have all these bright stars shining. And it kind of I felt invoked that trope where even though our loved ones leave us their presence remains as an impact on our lives. And it's kind of like we draw comfort from the fact that despite their physical absence, the memories that they've left us and the love that they gave us remains as this, embracing comfort. I thought that was a really nice way to re-emphasize what they were showing in this episode, which is the core importance of relationships in people's lives. I really think that so many positive things happened in this episode. You had Midori and Hyoko going out of their way to reconcile with Reki after a long time and trying to tell her that they still cared about her and that they still see her as a good friend. You had all of the Haibane except Reki hand out the festival nuts to all of the people in their lives who have positively impacted them and who care in some way for them and made their time in Glee a joyful one, including, all of their employers and their colleagues. So it really seems like everyone in the town, including all of the Haibane, have found their place in terms of the network of relationships that make up the townspeople. Everyone except Reki, who deliberately chose to stay home and not take part in recognizing the value of those relationships, despite the fact that she arguably does have some very, very close relationships with people that would tell her in a split second that she is valued, that she doesn't have to hold on to her past guilt, and that she also deserves her day of flight and deserves to be in a much more peaceful place. But for some reason, probably linked back to her feelings of guilt and her internalized feelings of loneliness and worthlessness, she is incapable of feeling any of that love or care. I don't think even after this second last episode that we got any closer to Reki having any sort of enlightened moment where she stops and is like, maybe I don't have to punish myself like this. The part about how each Haibane has the given name and then their true name was really fascinating. The name that we're born with isn't necessarily the one that we end up with. Ideally, as we, go through life and we encounter difficulties and learn from them and then mature as people, we, I guess, turn into better versions of ourselves to the extent where we actually get given new names, or we, well, that's more like a symbolic way of showing that we have changed as people for the better. And the fact that Reki, again, the communicator was like, she doesn't know her true name and she doesn't want to really know it. Like, she's not been able to listen to any of the words that I've been saying to her in guiding her towards discovering her true name. She's kind of just shut herself down from even that. So I don't know. There's still one more episode. I'm still harboring a hope, but I also feel like this show, it may just end up being a bittersweet conclusion or open-ended sort of end to the story if Reki just ends up going into her life of loneliness in Glee. And it's kind of just reminding us that not all stories end with learning to be a better version of yourself and then moving ahead with your newfound wisdom. Some people do, unfortunately, remain stuck in their state of depression or their state of just not seeing the value in themselves. I'd love to know what you guys thought. I'd like to go back now actually and just rewatch the entire thing because there's just lots of symbolism tucked here and there. I do look forward to next time going back really to the very beginnings of this series and seeing what kinds of clues were also tucked away in either the symbolisms or in the dialogue that we got. I just feel like Haibane has done so well in growing the story and all of the details about Glee and this life organically, not all at once, but in a slow sort of revealing way where you learn something new each and every episode that fills in a missing piece of the whole picture. So I've really enjoyed just sussing out all the mysteries with you guys. And that's it for this week. Just the one episode. Next time we'll probably go into deeper detail about what the show means and all of the predictions that I had that weren't horribly wrong. And also just what we can learn from this series, I think more than most series, or just for this type of genre, there's a lot you can draw from in terms of how you would apply its messages or its lessons to your own life. So that'll be interesting to talk about once we're actually done with the entire series. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and I'll catch you for next episode.